Yeah, the typical starch, when it's cooked and digested, if it isn't digested, then it goes down and feeds the bacteria, and that's a really bad effect. They've seen with these so-called prebiotic or probiotic semi-digestible starches that are being promoted. They have found that the poorly digested starches cause behavioral changes in their animals, makes them anxious and aggressive to have stuff fermenting in their intestine. And some of the products of bacterial action on these undigested materials can tremendously increase endotoxins and cause inflammation of the intestine, liver, and eventually all of the body. But the typical well-cooked starch, when it is digested, releases pure glucose. And in my first physiology lab, professor had us feed, I think it was a 10-gram dose of cornstarch to the lab rats. And she said, wait 10 minutes and then operate on the rat and see how far this huge glob of starch paste had migrated. And it turned out that there was no trace of any starch paste left in the rat after 10 minutes.
Well, it was all picked up.
It had just instantly been turned into glucose and absorbed. And we aren't quite as fast as rats, but when you look at the so-called glycemic index of foods, starch tends to be near the top, right, very similar to pure glucose. And that means that you get a quick, powerful stimulation of insulin when you eat starch or plain glucose, and that the insulin does its work quickly of disposing of the glucose by turning it into fat when you absorb more than you need.
But then your liver is, if it's turned into fat, then it didn't really store very much in your liver, right? Yeah,
it does that too, but when you have this very intense dose, some of it goes into the liver, but if it can't all momentarily be disposed of in the liver, then some of it turns into fat. So even though you aren't eating too many calories, if you eat it in the form of very quickly digested starch or pure glucose, you'll get these bursts of fat synthesis and tend to get fatter and fatter. And because the same thing that happens with a quickly assimilated glucose or starch, the same thing happens as when you eat a pure protein meal. The sudden falling of the blood sugar causes a surge of cortisol production, and then that changes your metabolism, makes you waste protein. Even if you didn't eat any, you'll then disturb some of your tissue, your thymus and muscles especially. And so the cortisol helps to direct the fat deposition to your waist area and back and face, as in Cushing's syndrome or the so-called metabolic syndrome.